Christine So. I'm the CEO of Humentum. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this first keynote session of our plenary session of our OPEX Africa conference. Thank you so much for joining us for the conference. We're really excited about it. We were excited to be able to bring it online and open it up widely to everyone who wanted to participate. And we've had great participation so far, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you in the days to come. Today, we're going to be hearing from Pape Gaye. Pape is the former CEO of IntraHealth, an organization that many of you may be familiar with. But Pape is a consummate leader in the international development sector. Originally from Senegal, Pape has been working in the sector for many, many years, and I've had the pleasure to work with him for the last 2 decades. So really, it was my pleasure and my honor to be able to have him, to invite him to come and wrap up this first day for us. Pape will be presenting on "We Can't Go On Like This: How to Finally Let Go of Development Status Quo." I think with everything that we're seeing in the news as we wake up or go on with our Monday indicates that many people have had enough of the status quo. And we are all grappling with, struggling with similar issues about how do we create a new tomorrow that is equitable and just and brings people out of poverty and allows people to live the lives that they can with full potential without being penalized because of where they may grow up or the color of their skin or their gender or other issues that may lead to them being oppressed. Development certainly has had these issues, and so I think Pape's words today are going to be even more important than they may have been last week. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Pape. He will take us through the presentation and remarks, and then we will have time for some question and answer. And Kim Kucinskis will be helping us facilitate that part of the session. Okay, Pape, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and over to you. Pape, you're on mute. All right, there we go.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. Greetings from beautiful Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So thank you so much for Humentum and the organizers for inviting me to join you. As Christine just mentioned, this is a subject that is dear to my heart. It is a subject of global development. First of all, I want to thank all of you, because if you have chosen this line of work, it says a lot about who you are, because it does take special folks, it takes special people to be able to dedicate their professional life to improving the lives of others who are less fortunate. So thank you for embracing this type of work. Let me also say a few words on the theme of this conference, which is the spirit for collective action. Because collective action is the way we are going to make progress in gaining social justice. Collective action is how we're going to move the agenda. Collective action is how we're going to leapfrog, and collective action is how we're going to harness the potential that exists on this earth, all financial potential, but also human resources. We've got great thinkers, great thought leaders, and so forth. I wanted to focus my conversation today on the subject of global development and the status quo. For a variety of reasons. One, I am a believer that we should not take another 50 years to get to where we are today. As you will see in a few minutes in my slides, we are making a lot of progress. We have made a lot of progress. But from my opinion, it has been slow. It has been slow mostly because we get stuck on the how we do the business, and we continue to use outdated model of development. I also think it's very timely to be talking about this in the midst of COVID-19, because for the first time, I was in a discussion with other leaders the other day, and we were talking about what good things are coming out of the COVID. And I was saying, well, if anything, the interconnectedness of the world is finally showing. I think the world is confronted with the same problems, and we see our behavior throughout this planet. But I think one point that is being made is yeah, we are connected, and we can learn from each other, and we have to learn each other, and we have to make the COVID battle a global battle altogether. So I think this is very timely, and I just believe also that the focus of this conference is Africa, and I think it is high time we need to start looking at Africa differently than we have been so far until now. So that's why I was very excited to be able to talk to you today about this subject. Next slide, please. It is easy to forget during a pandemic. However, there is a brighter and healthier future, and it's within our sight. The reason I'm saying this is what I just said a few minutes ago. I think there is enough resources on this planet. There is enough know-how. There is the advent of technology. And there is just a sense of urgency that I think is calling all of us to act differently. So I think it would be a mistake to just think because we are suffering such a difficult problem right now to forget that we can move forward. And we are close to building that world that is going to be healthier and better than what we have today. Next. So the reason I'm saying this is that in just 25 years, if you think about it, we are making incredible progress. I think it's actually good that we stop and think about it and celebrate that progress. Otherwise, we're gonna miss out. But look at some of these figures. We went from a staggering 1.9 billion living in extreme poverty just in 1990 to about 731 million in 2015. Now that is progress. That is actually incredible progress. Next. We can look at another area. If you look at HIV/AIDS and the progress we're making, we have AIDS-related mortality have declined by 33% since 2010. AIDS-related death have decreased 55% since they first peaked back in 2004, I believe. So, and you know today that somebody with HIV/AIDS could be just like another chronic disease. They can live a long and healthy life. That is progress, and we should not forget that. In fact, we reach a lot of this progress through collective action. And the HIV/AIDS world actually taught us so much lesson in how they mobilize, how people living with HIV/AIDS, the AIDS activists, you all know what the AIDS conference have become over the years. And a lot of it had a lot to do with collective action. Next. Then we also look at Between 2000 and 2017, maternal mortality ratio dropped about 38% worldwide. And a lot of us working in this field are so focused on this because this is a message that is not controversial. Everybody wants to improve maternal mortality, but we are making progress. And I think it's good we don't forget that. Next. Then we look at child mortality. 6.2 million fewer children died in 2018 than they did in 1990. Okay, next. Let me talk a little bit about an area that is important, neglected, and sometimes controversial, which it should not be, because it is simply about allowing women, well, really men and women, to plan their lives, to have access to contraception when they need it. I continue to believe that good family planning continues to be one of the most important development intervention. If we want to sustain our gain, and if we want to continue the battle for human rights and individual rights, we need to continue the work we are doing by making sure women, people who otherwise wouldn't, have access to contraception. Well, look at this progress we are making in that area. Since 2003, there are 114 million more women using modern contraception in 69 of the poorest countries. Next. So, unfortunately, we still have a lot to do. And there are major issues which justify why we cannot afford to slow down and why we cannot afford to take another 50 years to get where we are today. 5 billion people, according to the G4 Alliance, which is an alliance of organizations making sure that surgery is part of primary health care. Because for the longest time, we had taken it for granted that surgery can only happen in a tertiary care, tertiary setting, and so forth. And when you look at it, there are really some basic surgeries that should be part of the primary health care package. Well, when you start looking at it, unfortunately, the majority of us on this planet still lack access to that basic, safe surgery care. I want to give a shout out to the G4 Alliance and all of the organizations that joined that to continue to make sure that the message is clear that because you're poor does not mean you should not have access to all the services that you're entitled to. And surgery is certainly one of them. Next. I also want to talk about a major, major challenge which still is facing us, which is the shortage of healthcare workers. Obviously, this issue has been put front and center with COVID. It is very interesting that those of us dedicated to supporting development around the world have been focused on this particular subject for so long. We have been very timidly trying to say it's a global issue. It exists everywhere. It's not just the low-income countries. But the reality is that when this subject was put on the map back in 2006, we thought that the shortage, global shortage of healthcare workers was around 7 million. It turns out that with the SDGs and all of those goals that we set for ourselves, if you factor them in, that shortage is actually frightening. What is looming is a shortage of 18 million health workers. So, and when we use these statistics, we generally talk about professionally trained health workers. These figures does not even include community-based and lay workers. So, on one hand, we are talking about universal health coverage, and on the other, we have this huge challenge that we need to face. So you will agree with me that because of all of these, we cannot really rest, at least not yet. Next. So I'm progressively moving on to Africa and the focus on Africa. And because we cannot not really talk about COVID, I think it's interesting that we focus for a few minutes on how Africa is responding to COVID-19. And I have a lot of colleagues on this call who's listening who are extremely engaged. And I think we should look at some of the good things. I'm not trying to just paint a very rosy picture, far from that. But I do think it's in difficult times like this that you learn a little bit. Are we seeing Africa actually use the lessons learned from the Ebola crisis? Yes. We've got a number of countries that are actually demonstrating in front of our eyes their capability to learn from those very painful lessons. We have seen quick reorganizing or quick repurposing of the platforms that were set in these countries to attack the disease. We have seen incredible level of mobilization. We have seen incredible examples all the way from Rwanda to Senegal, a whole gamut of expertise that have been put in place. We have seen incredible get together of leadership. We have seen incredible focus. The jury is out and we will see. Everybody has been pointing to the weak health systems in Africa, and that clearly a large number of cases will be disastrous for the continent. But so far, Africa is holding tight and has only about 1.5% of the cases worldwide. It is good news. The things that they're talking about here in the United States, tracking, testing, tracing, making sure you put people in quarantine and stuff. A lot of countries have been doing it very, very early on. 2 or 3 days after it was announced that the disease was spreading, a lot of the countries mobilized. So I'd like us to think about these experiences. By the way, there have been several examples in preparation for this presentation. So great articles from the New York Times, the Guardians in the UK have been publishing a lot of good articles on how the continent is preparing. So my hope is that moving forward, post-COVID, would be able to think about this time in history and what countries that have maybe weak health system, but also have learned a lot and are now leveraging these investments that the donor community has made on the continent. So I think in a lot of sense, I am one of those that I'm an Afro optimist, and I believe that there is really cause for celebration in the future. So I'd like us to continue to track this and to see what we can learn to apply in the future. Next. The other reason why it is important actually that we start saying we need to do things differently. And I'm also inviting all of my colleagues, Africans, to really focus on what they're going to do. I think a lot of the conversation, if you're not careful, tend to be, what should we do as an international community? But unfortunately, that's synonymous to what should we be doing as donors. That's what we need to shift. We need to really shift a little bit and say, okay, the donor community is there to help, but what can we do to make sure that that assistance, that help is maximized? And what should be our response from within? Now, Africa is beginning to show the signs that it will be in a good place to do that. Africa is ready. People are actually beginning to say Africa is not rising, Africa has risen. I hope it's the case for healthcare in the future. But the reality is that by 2034, Africa could actually have a larger workforce than India or China. That is actually why I'm excited about the human capital and why I invite all of us to really put a big focus on that, because that's where we could make a difference. If we have a different approach of preparing our workforce and making sure this workforce delivers for us. Next. So I wanted to, with this slide, I'm going to move into the subject of collective action and some examples of what is being done on the continent to tackle some of these issues. Again, the idea here is to show the world that there are many, many examples of how people are coming together and doing things that are producing results and making an impact. And the more we can identify, share, talk about these things, the better we all will be. Africa can use a lot of South-to-South collaboration, because oftentimes there are good examples, but the resources are not there to actually share these. But I'm going to be drawing from a lot of the work from IntraHealth, which is the organization that I work for, which over the years has worked in 100 countries, and as you know, has really focused for a long time on building capacity on the ground in various areas. So a lot of these examples I'm going to be using is drawn from the work of IntraHealth, oftentimes supported by our donor, whether it's USAID or the private foundations like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So one of those great examples that I would like to share here is the Ouagadougou Partnership, which is a West Africa-based initiative which is working to expand family planning access. As you know, Francophone West Africa is behind when it comes to contraceptive prevalence. And for a number of years, it was the only part of the world where you still have single-digit contraceptive prevalence rate. And unfortunately, that continues to be the case. So the 9 countries decided to come together to see if harmonizing their activities and having one approach would be great to advance family planning. And I think it is happening. The initiative is coming to a close after 10 years, and the donors are looking into what to do beyond 2020. But I would invite you to look at a little bit more what is happening. We have an example of 9 countries coming together where the leadership has agreed that they are going to continue to share experience, and they're going to set a common goal, which was the first go around to have an additional 1 million users use family planning. And in the current phase, which is an acceleration phase, the goal is to have an additional 2 million plus women in that region. And I think this initiative is doing 2 things. First of all, it's putting family planning in the map in that region. Second of all, it has created this kind of a healthy competition where people now are able to look at each other, compare notes, talk to each other, come annually. The donors really, really are modeling working together. The Ouagadougou Partnership is a branded approach. You would not know. It's based in Senegal. The leadership is on a rotating basis. Currently, I believe the Minister of Health of Côte d'Ivoire is the focal point for his colleagues in the region. But this is a great example where government working hand in hand with civil society and increasingly with private sector is finally moving the needle. In a country, in a region of the world where you would see 0 growth in family planning uptake, now you're seeing countries like Senegal. Senegal has experienced a 4-point jump every single year in the last 4 years. And not everybody is making progress at the same rate, but it is looking very promising. Next. Another example, going to the other side of the continent, going toward Kenya, I wanted to share with you the example of the Afya Elimu Fund, which again was put in place to solve one problem, which is providing opportunities and access to education for healthcare workers that come from underserved areas. So this activity was actually originally sponsored by USAID in the context of one of their programs in Kenya, which was called the Funzo Kenya Project, which was a broad national program designed to improve the training and preparation of pipeline of healthcare workers. So to tackle these problems, a fund was set with a Kenyan organization, which has been in existence through the Ministry of Education for a number of years, which is dedicated to providing loan to future health workers. As you know, given the shortage, we need to mobilize as many people as we can, and we need to encourage our relatives and peers and friends to join the health field. And this is a good way of doing it by providing support. So the fund has been set up a few years ago with participation from the private sector, from the donor communities like USAID, IntraHealth, an implementing organization, has been managing this. And it has been a very, very successful endeavor, which I hope will be able to scale up and apply to other countries. As of now, we are talking about 30% since the program started over almost 10 years ago. About 30,000 people have benefited from loan. And by the way, the repayment rate is actually very, very good. I think it's in the neighborhood of 85%. That people get a job, start making money and are actually paying their loan back. So we are not asking, this is not, again, extending the hand asking for handouts. It is actually just creating an opportunity for people to be able to have access to the right kind of funding. Next. Another example, going back to West Africa, is an initiative currently funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and implemented with support from the Gates Institute for Reproductive Health at Johns Hopkins University. IntraHealth is managing the hub, the Francophone hub, which is really for the French-speaking countries. This example is good because it is another example of collective action, by the way, and it is another example of what our health field need to be doing more, which is to bring in new actors. This was designed to bring municipalities, mayors, and people working in that network to come in and begin to invest in family planning and other health programs. The focus of the Challenge Initiative right now is family planning, but this is mobilizing new players. And we are seeing actually the impact in the 9 countries. This is not your typical project in that the framework is set up, and if mayors are interested, they have to show commitment by investing, either by creating a line item in their budget or bringing resources, such as maybe a health center or a hospital that they have built. But they have to come in and demonstrate commitment, and they have to write a proposal to be invited to join into this. Again, I will invite you to look at this. You can look at some of these examples through our website at IntraHealth. You could also look at Johns Hopkins Gates Institute to read more about the Challenge Initiative. Right now, it is happening in 4 locations, I believe, including West Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and India, I believe. Okay, next. Okay. So coming here at the heart of really what I wanted to talk about, which is this shift that we need to do, why we cannot continue with this status quo. I think what is happening with COVID is that it's forcing the issue a little bit. It has become very, very clear that post-COVID, we're going to have to be operating very differently. But I think it is important as active players in this field that we take this opportunity to just pause and look at what we've been doing and look at where we want to go. And I want to challenge you for something that I used to tell Intra staff a lot. I do not think what got us to where we are today is necessarily what's going to take us to where we want to go. So it is very, very clear to me that in order to move with the speed with which we want to move, if we want to harness the potential that exists in technology, if we want to celebrate the shift that has happened in our landscape of global development, if we want to embrace the new talent, the new opportunities that we have with all of these social entrepreneurs that have joined this field en masse, we have to do things differently. There's no way we just can continue to say, You know, that's the world. It's a nonprofit, and I wanna talk to us in the nonprofit sector, because there has been some ingrained thing which has been good, but which we need to shift. This is no longer the field that just belongs to a few nonprofit organizations, and this is no longer a field that is just for the mission-driven and the people that care for the others. We need to make room for people who are coming from different backgrounds. We need to make room for people who tend to not understand what we're talking about, or people who still doubt why we should promote international family planning, or people who think that a measles vaccination is a bad thing, or people who are not necessarily in the health sector. We just cannot do that. If we continue to do the work the same way we've been working, our progress is going to continue to be extremely slow. So let's take this pandemic as an opportunity to pause and think about what these hurdles are and what can we do collectively and individually to overcome them. So I have, in an article that I published a year ago or so for Forbes magazine, I talked about these 5 big hurdles which I wanted to share and just invite your thought on. Next. The number one is an outdated model. Let's face it. It is just not working anymore. I think it worked fine. It was a model that is basically very top-down, very donor-driven, and it continues to be that way a little bit. But that's what I call, this is just my own term, a kind of a missionary model. It's people with a purpose, with a sense, you know, in a very top-down approach, coming to go and convince some people and so forth. I think it worked, but I think we're beginning to see its limitations. We're beginning to wonder, how come we keep repeating things? How come we cannot scale these proven strategies that we know work? How come when we have these huge conferences, it's the same people that come? How come the average Joe in the street who does not understand development or global health or something thinks that the US is spending a lot more money than they actually are? So it's all of this because we have reached this status quo. And that's what we need to just move out. So this outdated model, next. Basically, to me, I call this, it's a conventional development paradigm. It was rather simple, linear, and siloed. It's simple because you are trying to eliminate this disease and then you give it everything. You have a vertical kind of a way of doing it. When you look at today, the model that we have, we still have the remnant of these things. The funding is coming according to the disease or the issues. This donor does not really talk to this donor. This government wants to handle malaria programs, but they also have an HIV/AIDS program, and they are using 2 methods to do it. So, and we are extremely siloed, and my feeling is that the health field is actually the most siloed of all the sectors. Predominance of verticality. You know, and it works, guys. It's hard. I really don't know if I have the answers, because if you give it the focus, you'll get the results. A lot of people will tell you, you know, that's why we were successful in vaccination program. That's how we eradicated smallpox. That's, you know, that's eventually how we're gonna eradicate polio. You know, you need that focus. People who are working in family planning for a long time will tell you, we lost a lot of ground when we started doing this integration business and so forth. So I'm not at all saying that it's simple, but that's what it is. I think there's a high dependency of overseas development assistance for these things. We've said it for the longest time. Our governments in sub-Saharan Africa really left the health field to the donor and the donor communities. So there is a power imbalance. You have got the high-income countries, the multilateral implementing in low-income countries. So you've got this imbalance. We don't have a level playing field. We want to hear the voice of the countries, but oftentimes, you know, it's just not balanced. And I think the onus is on the donors, on the implementers, to find ways to level the playing field. We had limited number of actors, as I was saying earlier. It's, you know, this organization working in this field, that organization working in this field. And for the longest time, we only focused on infectious diseases. We were dealing with malaria, we were dealing with HIV/AIDS. And you all know that this has completely changed now. Next. So what we're doing is actually moving toward this evolving paradigm. And I'm using the term evolving because I think we are still building it. It's a kind of a hybrid. It's very hard to undo, you know, the USAID is an organization that has been operating for so many years, that have incredible structures, that is doing incredible amount of work, that is just the prime funders for a lot of these things. And a lot of those mechanisms are in place. And a lot of them are tied to the lives we're trying to save. And these are not systems you can just change overnight. But it's important and it is essential we make the commitment to make the changes. We are moving toward a new paradigm which is going to be characterized by its complexity. Rather than linear, it's circular. It is multiple donors and actors. You've seen it. You're seeing it every single day. You're seeing these new philanthropists, the young philanthropists who are looking for something different to fund or different ways to do this. You're having now this whole idea of co-creation, more focus on equality. I think these are terms that it's finally holding, and people are just saying, we are thinking about how do we have this constituency, that constituency. Collaboration is key. You can, if you read the SDGs and the way those goals are formulated, the only way we can do them is going to be through collaboration, through partnership. So whereas we used to pay lip service to these things are now part of how we're going to work and how we're going to maintain impact. We're going to have to be tackling several issues. It was never simple. It's rather than or, it's and. You know, you look at the global health field. As I mentioned earlier, surgery has become extremely important, and there are people fighting because it is part of it. We have to add it. You know, we have to deal with NCDs now because we cannot just continue to focus just on you know, it is. We know that NCD is going to be the biggest killers. You know, we have to integrate. We don't have the choice anymore. We have to find ways to take health into food security, into good governance. It's all the same. It's all development. The person you're trying to help is a person that just has lots of needs. That's a complex individual, so this is a complex situation. Localization, I know this has been a big subject on this conference. This is a subject dear to my heart because I think it's not as easy as it is, but it is probably the most important piece that we need to pay attention. It is the biggest circle in this thing for that reason. Just because in our eagerness to help, we also hurt if we don't pay attention and make sure we leave a legacy of people who are trained and who can carry the work that we are doing right now. It has to be a part of it. We have to commit to this. And we have to commit to the fact that maybe we have not been doing it right. We have to look at and analyze our own doing, our own contribution to making sure. Certainly the work that Humantum is doing is essential, because building capacity is the first part of empowering people. Or I actually don't like the term empowering. It is giving people opportunity. It is all creating the opportunity for people to thrive. I think the first one is to just commit, to say, you know, we've done it well. We've done an incredible job. We've accomplished so much. Now we've hit this wall. And what it is about is lessening the burden by inviting others to come. The biggest stakeholders are people who have a lot at stake, who just wants to go ahead and create a better conditions for their people. So this is what calls us. This is why we cannot just continue to go on as nothing has changed. Because first of all, it's like anything that's outdated. People are gonna laugh when you use it. First of all, and again, it is about urgency. To me, the reason why we cannot afford to just continue to do the same thing, things are too urgent. You know, we should not be dying. There should not be the number of deaths we're having with COVID today. This world has enough resources to be ready for COVID and future COVID. And we can finish this unfinished development business if we put our mind to it. So that's what I see as the evolving paradigm. Next. The number two challenge I see is what I'm grouping here in terms of trust. There are going to be trust issues, and they're going to continue to be trust issues, because trust is something that you build, is something that you gain, and it is not a magic pill. You can be the richest person on the ground. People are very smart that are going to play your game to have access to your money, but it does not mean that they trust you. My feeling that if we take the time to build the trust that is needed around the work that we are doing, it will be a superb way to level the playing field. It will be a superb way to bring in more people around the table. And it'll be a superb way to advance our agenda much faster. And there are a lot of battlefields for this. It is, how do we get government to trust the private sector companies? How do we get NGOs to trust multilaterals? How do we get governments to trust NGOs and not just see them as disruptor or people who are going to come and make them look bad? So I would invite us moving forward that we really look at how we do this. Next. One way you can do that is by also ending with this idea that one size fits all approach. This is probably the biggest hurdle that we have, because we tend to see development in a monolithic way, especially when you start looking at this donor-driven thing, because we've done it in other countries, we can just redo it. It's not going to work. If there's one thing in development, it's context. It's context, context, context. This is why we really need to focus at the place where we're implementing our work. And this is why we need to take the time. The problem is trust is being something that is going to be so long to accomplish. It's just much faster to have a canned approach. I'm also telling you that I think a canned approach is the biggest danger to making progress in a way that is going to last. Next. I know we are being short of time on time, but we're almost done. I don't want to be political or anything, but I do think one big challenge we'll have to face is what are we going to do with the rise of nationalism that we are seeing around the world? We're seeing among the donor community. It's not just, I think there is a danger, and I think it is smart to anticipate what issues and problems you're going to have into the future and try to combat that. There is no doubt in my mind the rise of nationalism is going to destroy everything that we do if we don't pay attention to it and if we don't find a way to be closer to those people that don't believe or that think that the solution is to close all the borders and stay with yourself. I think everything we have helped build in the last half century risk being destroyed if we don't find a way to counter the bad effect of nationalism. Unfortunately, this includes cultural, this includes lack of belief, this includes poo-pooing science, this includes all sorts of things. And I just think we cannot close our eyes and pretend like we're operating in a world that is the same. Unfortunately, we have made progress, but we have also lost a lot of ground when it comes to just this whole sentiment that is existing around the world today. Next, which I think could be my final, maybe not. Time and vision, it is extremely important that we accept the fact that development does take time. You know, we don't want to take 10 years. We don't, you know, we want to pay attention to progress. We want to measure. But I do think it's important that we recognize that, because otherwise it could be, especially if you're an NGO like in this community, and we are really trying to satisfy our donor. Our donor put so much pressure in that there's kind of time. But these things are just important. So I invite us also to just revisit the vision that we want to have. I think for Africa, it has to be more than positive. Africa, we need to do so much to undo some of the work, some of the problems that currently exist. We have talked for so long about corruption, you know, the dark continent, you know, the same. So it's high time that we celebrate this gain. So I would say that a positive vision and a positive future is really called for. And I think there are a lot of good reasons for doing that. You know, things are picking up. We are seeing great economic growth in the continent. We're seeing faster economic growth than any other part of the world. So I do think we need to have this very good, positive vision for Africa. Next. Localization is part of how we will achieve sustainable development. It just is, because it is people that criticize us or criticize big funding organizations say that, you know, we get caught into building this huge machine, then we spend all of our time feeding the beast because we have gotten. So I do think, in all fairness, we just need to stop and say, how is that going to jive with the goal of making sure we build capacity, we put the emphasis that we need to put on localization. So I'm glad that Humantum put this on the agenda. I'm glad that this is a subject of conversation, but it is not as simple as it might look. And it is not about donor community just deciding that they are going to localize. In fact, they are the least well-placed to localize. It is about actors like us, like you, who need to say, yes, this makes sense. And you know what, guys? It also takes the courage to unlearn some of the stuff that we learned. Because we learn a lot of good things, but we also learn some things we need to change. And unfortunately, they include attitude. And, you know, that attitude that I know you don't, I have, you don't, I'm gonna help you because you don't know how to help yourself. Unintentionally, we learn these bad habits. And we need to be courageous enough to say, you know, it's not working anymore. And it's not about me, it's about people I'm trying to support. So because of that, I invite you, and I hope we will commit it and redouble our effort so that we are successful in localization. Next. I thought that was the last. And then we need to build trust among our partners. Next. I would like to invite you to do this. Prioritize cultural competencies. I think this is the way eventually we're going to become global citizens. I think this is the way we're going to foster understanding among us. You know, I used to do, when I supported the Peace Corps a few years ago, I used to do a lot of cultural training and cultural competency. I used to emphasize so much about differences. In the end, what I learned after all these years is that, in fact, we are so much more similar than we are different. And, but the beauty in the journey of embarking in cultural competency is that that's what you will find at the end. You will find that humanity. You will find that in the end, we're all human. And that is really the reason why we should prioritize cultural competencies. Understanding that in the end, people just have the same values, the same goals. They want to raise their family. They want to have a decent education for their children. They want to put food on the table. And they want to feel like they are a productive member of society. That is universal, regardless of where you are. So in our process of unlearning all the bad habits that we learn, that will be the gift at the end. And you will find that it is very, very fulfilling. Next. Finally, I want you to embrace adaptive change management. If you're not convinced now, in the middle of COVID, that the only thing that is constant in our world is change, and we need to learn to adapt. When I'm saying let's learn about cultural competency, that is part of the process. It is readying ourselves so that we can adapt. So I will invite you to also do this, to assume that what you've learned was good, but given where you're trying to go, maybe you also need to adapt. Was that my last slide? Yes, it was. So I thank you for listening to me. This was a long presentation. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you.
Pape, thank you so much. I will just tell you that we're getting amazing comments in the chat, and I invite everybody to contribute there. You know, I think for me, what really, really resonated was this idea about, you know, change is the constant. We have to unlearn ways that we have been taught and embrace new ways of working. And that's hard, but it is required of all of us if we want to actually live a new future. So thanks, due to time, it is almost the half hour.
I know.
But I don't think that we would have given up 1 minute of what you had to share with us. So no worries there.
Good.
We actually have this Zoom room for another 30 minutes, I believe, Kim. And so we invite everyone to just stay on in the room if you would like to have some more discussion with Pape and with the other participants. We'll be able to continue. We can take comments and questions in the chat stream, and we can also invite you to go off of mute if you would like to do that. So I am just going to keep us going in that case. And we had a great question about the role of social enterprise and social entrepreneurship. And, you know, how do you see the role of social entrepreneurship in advancing change on the continent? Should this be a way forward for NGOs, governments, and private sector organizations that want to bring transformative change? And I will thank Maurice in Nairobi for that comment. But Pape, why don't I turn it over to you while we see if we get any other comments?
Absolutely. Thank you, Maurice, for asking that question. You know, if there's one thing I'm excited about personally after being of 30 years in this field is how social entrepreneurs have engaged into this thing. What social entrepreneurs have done actually is coming to this space in big times with these very bold ideas. First of all, I think they challenge the traditional NGO, eventually becoming the dinosaurs if we don't watch out. And they bring a lot of energy. Social entrepreneurs bring lots of great energy. They think they can do the job faster, better, and cheaper. And if you're a client shopping around, that's what you're looking for. So I would say yes. I would say the science of social entrepreneurship should be expanded, should be taught, should be included. The reason why it is so appropriate, especially for Africa, is a lot of Africans are born social entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. Believe me, when you look at the women that have been primarily responsible for the economic growth of that West Africa, you know, you've heard about the Nana Benz that was all in this, in the business of selling the material and so forth. If you look at, I lived in Togo for about 12 years, and I was all amazed within each family how they teach the young kid to be very entrepreneurial at a very young age and all of that. So there's something natural in us. In fact, you know, if you're familiar with Daniel Pink and one of his theory about motivation is that, you know, that sense that we all have as human to have a purpose and to have a certain autonomy in what we do, all of the characteristics that are embodied in what being social entrepreneurs mean. So yes, I do think we need to embrace social entrepreneurship. Not only should we open the door for these social entrepreneurs to come in, but I think we should adopt it as one of the strategy for reaching sustainability. Definitely.
Thanks, Pape. And we had a follow-up question, which was, what would you consider a conducive environment for social entrepreneurship? What are some of those components that we need to see put in place to really help us realize this?
Well, unfortunately, the biggest one is kind of a legal environment that facilitates this, enabling environment, because we cannot continue to have social entrepreneurs operate freely in an environment where the space is closing for civil society. And unfortunately, what is happening with the movement of unless we have civil society playing its role 100%, and that needs to be facilitated by government. If government continues to be afraid of civil society because they think people are these are human rights activists and so forth, unfortunately, civil society is much larger than that. So I think the work needs to be done with government, because that's where I see as the major block, the major challenge, is to make sure that we have enabling environment, that people are not going to be pursued because they start something that the government is going to be seen as threatened and so forth. And then just the sense that people can play if they want to play. We need to create that. And then you do that by also doing things like making data available and transparent. Open data, for example, would be a very good thing to the extent that you can, because if you make the data available, then people can have access to it, and their effort as social entrepreneurs could pay a lot more dividend. So there are a few thoughts, but
And so thinking about social entrepreneurship, that's really a way to do things differently. And as you said, it's got deep roots in Africa. We have a question, just a small question. At what point do you think Africa will become self-reliant?
I actually don't think it's that far.
Right.
I don't think it's that far. I think a continent that still has incredible resources sometimes be a curse. Several countries have discovered gas and oil. I think the number of countries that have just discovered gas and oil in sub-Saharan Africa is incredible. But I actually think what's going to do it is the human resources. I think it's the talent. I think it's people who are coming back. Look at the trends, follow the trend lines, and then you'll actually be surprised. If you go to a few countries, you see the generation that is now occupying the seats at ministries and decision making. That I think where the change is going to come. I think the change is actually, and I think technology is going to accelerate that. Let's give credit. There were some major technologies today that were created in Africa. Africa had mobile money way before a lot of countries up here. You've heard of Ushahidi that facilitated those elections, and that was really the advent of social rising, social movement. And so I actually think it's going to be much, much faster than we anticipate. I think we're looking at, well, I don't want to give a prediction, but I just think that people are smarter. And I think as we get interconnected, I think the passion, I think I've seen more people now ready to finish their studies and go back. And I think social entrepreneurship and these things are really creating opportunities that we did not have before. So yeah. And don't want to give you a timeline, but yeah, go ahead, Christine.
And so, it sounds like social entrepreneurship is one step in moving into this new way of working. And certainly localization is another. We have a question about localization. What do you see as the steps to getting localization right? How do we move from this kind of neo-colonialist approach to an approach that's really grounded in local power and capacity?
So both the donors and the countries have to change their mindset when it comes to believing that it can work or not. It might be very simple, but I think it's a first step. You have to believe that it's possible. Otherwise, you're barking on the wrong tree. And I think the reason why our major funder, USAID, has decided to embark on the journey of self-reliance is I think it's right. I think it is a good strategy for making sure that aid as we know it today disappears. But whatever your reason is, you have to believe it. You have to believe that, yes, people I'm trying to support eventually will take charge and so forth. That is really the first step. If you're just paying lip service to it, or you're just doing it because your donor tells you you're going to do it, it's not going to work. It's not going to work because you're going to follow the money. And so I think that mind shift saying, you know, we've done this for so many years, it needed to be done, but we don't need to do it the same way moving forward. And it has to be believed by the people too who are receiving this help, Christine. It's not just a one-way thing. It is not just the people coming to help. A lot of people come with a lot of money and they actually have good intention. But I'm coming back to this unlearning business. We have learned some bad habits. We have learned how to read the mind of the donor. And we have learned to condition ourselves to do what the donor wants us to do. That has to stop. That attitude is deadly. It's actually more dangerous than the attitude that the donor or the supporter has. Why do you think it's been so slow? And why do you know, part of it is that's the root of corruption. Let's just name it. We have to root out corruption. And corruption is that in our field, that's unfortunately the form. It's like playing donors. The other is collecting 1 million from this donor and not telling the other one, et cetera, et cetera. So the mindset shift needs to happen on both sides for this to happen. And I think the rest then will flow naturally. The rest is really creating an enabling environment. It is really also accepting that it is about lessening the burden. For the longest time, we have let government try to do this on its own. And that is not fair. If everybody played their part, then the collective action will be much stronger. Yeah. So for me, I'm insisting on these because these are the most difficult part. These are the things that you cannot pinpoint necessarily, but that is really, to me, that is where the work needs to happen. And you can do that by starting with education, by starting the way we train people, by making sure these are part of the curriculum and all of these things. But that, to me, that's the hardest part, and that's the biggest. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, what you are describing sounds very much like a movement. We need a social movement, not just quote unquote.
You do.
International development work. And,
you do.
And do you have some words for us, some guidance for us when we bump up against people who aren't willing to change, who are very comfortable in working in that old paradigm? What do you do? How do you move forward when you hit an immovable object? Someone who may be benefiting from corruption or may just not have an open enough mind to see ways of doing things differently.
Yeah, you know, it's hard. I think the best we can do, you know, without much work, frankly, I meet so many people who appreciate what I do without even understanding. They'll say that, you know, and I said that at the beginning, and I meant it. I do think it takes a special person to embark in this job. So to embark this line of work. So my advice to you, that is big, and is not to undermine that. I would see that as a privilege rather than anything else. You know, I see it as a privilege to be able to interact and exchange with my fellow American or Australian, or I just find that rich. But if you can hone in the message on this fact that you're talking about humanity, I mean, that what is happening in this country this weekend is incredible. And I've never heard that word humanity come so strongly. In the end, that's what it is about. You know, I think people will eventually connect when they feel comfortable that you're not trying to hurt them. And that basically you're just trying to live your life and you're trying to make a contribution. There's just nothing more powerful. Other than that, you know, the things that I've decided to start doing, you know, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have been tremendous in their effort to document, publicize, talk about what we are doing and the progress we're making. That's something we need to be doing more. I mean, sharing the things that we're doing, because in a lot of ways, people who don't understand your work are so far away that they cannot really connect with this work. So the more you can share, the more, you know, you can give examples, the more you can show pictures. Those are basic things, but they will go a long way in helping people understand. So I'm asking you actually to take on a lot more of the burden of helping. And you know, I don't have an answer for you, but what are you going to do with somebody who seems so obnoxious? But don't give up, please. If you give up, that's just, as a development person, you cannot give up.
Yes.
You cannot.
I think tenacity is all of our
Yes.
names. Yes.
Yes, it is. That is exactly it.
And so thinking about this change in the way that we work and the way that we perceive what we are doing, I mean, so localization is obviously a shift to putting power in the hands of the global South. What becomes of the global North? What becomes of the international NGOs that have a particular working model, that have been relegated to working very much in a competitive nature with one another because of the ways that donors give money? What is the role of the global North in all of this? And are we willing to embrace this new way of working?
So this is my theory. My theory is that you need to start something. You need to start somewhere. And you need to be a catalyst. I think the global North need to work toward becoming catalysts. And I think that's a different role than the role we're playing. I think, you know, I follow the recommendations from studies that have been done, whether it's that famous IFG study, Ahead of the Curve, that talk about the role of international NGOs in the future. I think we need to embrace new roles. We need to see ourselves as, rather than being implementers, what we want to do is help implement. You know, those kind of things. They might have their shift, but their mindset shift. If you think your role is to implement the work that USAID gives you, only that, then it would not be enough. But if your role is to implement and pass the baton, but eventually what you want to be and what you want to do, and that has to be an individual decision and has to be an organizational decision. What are you going to dedicate yourself to doing? So I think that's the first thing that you need to do. It's an internal work, but there is definitely a letting go piece. There is a pivot piece. There's a shift piece. You know, if you are of the position that I'm fine, I'm going to just do what I've been doing, then it's your decision. But I don't think that's going to be helpful. But I do think if you celebrate what you've done and you say, what role do I want to play? And it has to start at your individual level first, by the way. What commitment are you making to, what are you going to let go of things you were doing before? And what are you going to put a timeline in how much you're going to do what you're doing, or are you going to commit yourself to at least working with one person in the countries where you work to make sure you know, those kind of things you really need to do. I think the role of the global North will actually be richer. I think just like we're going to have to adapt to what technology and artificial intelligence is doing and so forth, we're going to have the same attitude. Our job is just going to be different. I do not think our job is going to disappear. I think the world is not moving to an individualized country, at least people like me believe that we are moving toward a globalized world where the world is going to be closer together. And in that, we are not talking about the North abandoning the South or the South abandoning the North. We are talking about building bridges, forging things that are going to be lasting. So for me, it is not our jobs is going to disappear, our line of work. No, I think we're going to move into more exciting things. You know, when I started this work over 30 years ago, my organization, IntraHealth, used to be a training organization. We traveled the world. We mostly fielded consultants, and we paid them to go and train people. A lot of that work we don't do anymore. We got out of that work because there's enough trainers, there's enough training of trainers that happen and all of that. So I think we're going to create the space for more things, more innovative things to do. We're going to create things for bigger challenges. And we're going to be able to put global goods, global public goods on the table, because that is actually part of the next piece for all of us, is to focus on that. How do we generate these tools and goods and stuff that countries and institutions can use on their own? So that's how I see it in my way of thinking. I see a shift in the scope and the quality and the characteristic of what we're going to be doing. But it's not no job, it's a job that's going to be more impactful and more opportune for times to come. But you have to prepare for that. You just, you see the speed at which everything is moving, the speed at which technology is moving. One of the things we're going to see for sure is that not everybody is going to be ready to jump in a plane to go for the next assignment. So we're going to have to be creative about how do we actually deliver that thing. So folks, I hope you think that too. I think we are in an era, in a new era of technical assistance and a new era of development. And this is the opportunity to actually put on the ground the foundation for what those models would look like. Rather than seeing yourself as losers in this process of localization, you should see yourself as trailblazers that are actually getting into some new territory to conquer. It is really exciting. I think it's exciting for somebody who wants to learn, for somebody who wants to push the boundaries, for someone who wants to think out of the box. I think these are the best times for somebody who wants to broaden their thinking, have a systemic ways of. So that's really how I see it. I see it as very exciting, and I see it as just very heartwarming in our ability in the future to see results faster, better, and of higher quality.
Thanks. Yeah, you touched on the question of human capacity and human potential. And we are, and this incredible shift that we're seeing right now because of the global pandemic, where we've had lots of expatriates repatriated. We have seen people going back to Africa in response to the pandemic, but also, as you mentioned, a lot of young people who have been trained outside of Africa wanting to go back, wanting to grasp the opportunities that are there. And now, actually, I think there's going to probably be more room for people to come back and get positions in their home countries or in neighboring countries. So how do you see that shift benefiting the continent, benefiting countries? Is that the new future that we're moving into?
I think it is a future where development today will shift. I do think we are going to see I think rather than dreading the the private sector. I think we're going to embrace private sector. I think we're going to move to a world where we're going to have mixed models. I think we're going to have mixed markets. I think we're going to have a cohabitation of public sector markets and private sector markets. And we're going to have, it's a world where in sub-Saharan Africa, of course, the middle class is increasing, so purchasing power is increasing. So you're going to have a market for people who, rather than engaging in medical tourism, if services are available in their country, will buy it. So that's really the way of looking at it, is saying, let's look at the world we're going to be entering in. And how is that world going to be different? We still have to deal with providing to the last mile. And that is unfinished business. That's going to remain unfinished business until all 7 billion of us have access to health care. I think our job will not be done. But by and large, I think we're going to see these shifts. We're going to see incredible things happening with urbanizations. So I think that's a world we need to be prepared for. And I think in that world, Africa is going to have to rise up and do things differently or interact differently. Luckily, we've had a few countries that have set the stage. I mean, I think you have to say that the Rwandas and the Ethiopias of the world have done a good job modeling what government could do by creating the situation. We still have a lot of work, but I see a world of opportunity. I see a world of a little bit more level playing field in terms of just the conversation, because in the end, the donors and so forth will align to what exists on the ground when they arrive. And the stronger that is, then the better for everybody. So I think all of these dynamics are gonna come, but again, we have to learn to leverage it. Otherwise, if we don't open our mind, or if we're not done ready ourselves for that world, then we're gonna miss it. But I think if we open our minds and we look and we are smart in the way we approach things, then I think there's a lot of good things to be harnessed. And I think I only see positive things in the future.
Well, Pape, we are out of time. There are a few more questions. I'm just going to thank those of you who may have asked a question that hasn't been answered. We are capturing what is going on in the chat. And I am just going to say, thank you so much for your presentation and for the discussion that has followed. I know that we are all very energized by this. Thanks. And it is, I just think that the things that you have brought up and that we've discussed in this session are a great scene setter for the 3 days to come. And also just frankly, for me, really were some of the things that I needed to hear today. There are so many challenges out there. We have challenges in our everyday lives and our everyday work already, but right now is particularly challenging. And so, really being given, I think, what really can be called hope from you about, how we can build this new enabling environment, what that should look like, how we should be working together and what our mindsets should be. And I think in particular, you really underscored it has to start with us as individuals. And then we bring that into the work that we do in organizations, within communities, within societies. And so I think that becomes a call to action for each one of us to really embrace these ideas that you've shared with us today and really think about unlearning and changing and managing our change going forward. So with that, on behalf of the group, I am going to thank you, Pape, and wish you well and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Christine, and thank you for inviting me and for listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.